Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, which is available as a paperback, an audiobook, and the ebook is free. Free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. Get hooked on the series. Come see me with money for books 2 and 3. There's no time. My God, we've got at least 3 authors here tonight. We got to get right into this. My guest is none other than author A. Deborah Baker, who is also author Mira Grant, who is also author Seanan McGuire, and probably a couple of pen names that aren't public knowledge, yeah?
Yep.
Esteemed audience knows that I never summarize anybody else's biography or anybody else's book, because that's just a terrible way to start the show, is to make you listen to me describe you. So if you would give esteemed audience kind of an overview of your background, and we'll go from there.
Hello, I am Seanan McGuire. I also write as A. Deborah Baker, who is a middle grade author, which is why I'm relevant to you at all. And my background is I dual majored in folklore and herpetology at the University of California, Berkeley, go Bears. And that qualifies me to basically either sell French fries or write books about dragons. And I opted for the dragons.
So I had seen that you had originally, well, I don't know where you started, but I know at age 12 you were doing stand-up comedy.
That is correct. I had severe social anxiety as a child. I'm still not super comfortable with people in unscripted situations, but I was very anxious. I didn't like people. I was the weird little fat girl. And part of what my therapist recommended for dealing with this was stand-up comedy. So they enrolled me in the San Francisco Young Comedians program, and I started doing lots of local stand-up comedy, did shows, did a couple of variety pieces, and kept that up until well into my 20s.
And so at what point, because I know that you paid for part or all of your undergraduate degree writing Harlequin romances. So at what point did you start to transition from performing to still performing, but in front of your computer for an audience reaction later, I suppose?
So there is a concept in stand-up comedy. It's called working blue. This podcast does not work blue, and so I'm not going to give you an example, but it's basically doing extremely profane and frequently sexually charged material. So a lot of things that no one's parents want me saying right now, including my own, quite honestly. And I did not, I started publishing in 2009, and that seems really recent, but in internet years, it was a millennia ago. Social media was a baby when I first started publishing. I'm not certain when Facebook came out, but I'm actually Googling it right now. So Facebook was first created in 2004. So it was about 5 years old. It was still small. Facebook was still that thing that your grandma did and tried to get you to join so that she could see pictures of the grandbabies. It was not a standard thing that you could just go online and find everything about everyone and where they were going to be. So I did not cross-promote my stand-up work with my books. I didn't want them contaminating each other, as it were. And while only the books under the A. Deborah Baker name are actually written for a middle grade audience and intended for kids to read, I try to make sure that everything I do is safe for kids like the kid I was. I was watching horror movies already. I had heard some swear words. I knew that sometimes if you fight with a blob monster, you get dissolved. But I didn't want to read sexy books, and I didn't want to read books that really lingered on some of those things. So I tend to view all of my work as suitable for 12 and up, even if some of it is very much not meant for 12 and up and would not necessarily be every 12-year-old's cup of tea. Nothing is everyone's cup of tea. So there's not a huge amount of swearing. There's not graphic sex. There's none of that stuff in my written work. Well, I was doing a local stand-up show. I had been called in at the last minute because one of their headliners had to drop out. And so they needed someone who was enough of a name that people wouldn't feel like they had been rooked out of the cost of their ticket, but was not such a big deal that they would demand a lot of money or concessions from the venue. So I wound up being on the marquee of this little San Francisco comedy club at the last minute. Didn't say anything about it online. There wasn't time. And still somehow a couple of my readers found out about it. And they came to the show. And after the show, in the lobby, they were just horrified. They came up to me and they were literally revolted by the things that I had said. After we're done with recording, I can give you the names of the routines I did. Stand-up comedy is usually divided into bits. So you'll have the bit about the shark, or the bit that you call That Time I Went to San Diego. The titles of these bits will explain to you why these people were so upset. But, you know, they thought of me as kind of a renegade Disney princess. And then they came to this thing, and I'm saying this absolutely horrible stuff. And the room is laughing, and I'm clearly very happy. And they were just really upset. And I stopped that night and went, I have been doing stand-up comedy for 15 years. For more than 15 years. I have been doing stand-up comedy for a long time. And I have not broken out. I haven't had that routine that gets you the stand-up comedy special on Netflix. I haven't had my own Douglas. I either need to buckle down and become a stand-up comic, like really work and become the stand-up comic I want to be, or I need to stop because it is not compatible with the books I want to write and the stories I want to tell. So at that point, I just stopped. That was the last headline show I ever did.
No, in all fairness, I just saw you absolutely murder it. I think it was the 2019 National Book Awards, where you were in front of a mic, and you know there was quite a bit. I mean, not a prepared routine, obviously, but there was quite a bit of humor. You made me laugh. I heard the audience laughing, and I've seen you present elsewhere. And of course, obviously, your books have quite a bit of some of your books. You've written so many that they have all kinds of things, but some of your books have quite a bit of humor in them as well. So I'm assuming that stand-up comedy base still comes in handy for you.
Oh, absolutely. And part of my stand-up comedy training involved a lot of improv, which is where things like the National Book Awards really play in. It's not the same as stand-up comedy, even though you use a lot of the same techniques and a lot of the same skills.
So forgive my naivete for this question, because obviously it goes without saying, we love our readers. We would do anything for our readers. God bless your readers. Mm-hmm. But your relationship with readers, at least on paper, I would think is kind of ends at the book or an event that you do. So if you want to go off and do something else, whatever that something else, if you want to go skateboarding with Tony Hawk, if you want to do stand-up comedy, what business is it of theirs, whether you're having fun or not? And I don't know if there's a good answer for that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
There isn't really a good answer. We want there to not be a strong relationship. You know, we signed up to be Isaac Asimov, not Britney Spears. I am not a social media star. I don't want to be. I am not someone who sells, look at me, I'm perfectly composed and put together and I should be on your magazine cover. I am someone who wants to have a personal life, who wants to go out and do things that make me happy in the world. But I do sometimes have to stop and look at what I'm doing and measure what I want to be doing against how is that going to play in Peoria, as it were. And I think that's very normal. That's a balancing act that we're all starting to do almost automatically. You know, we're recording this in June of 2021. As we're recording this, a global pandemic is still going on. People are still dying all over the world. And most of us have been in lockdown since March or April of 2020. We just spent 12 months in our houses. And we're starting to cautiously, you know, go back into the world if we've been vaccinated. Well, for the last year, anytime I was going to have someone in my house for whatever reason, I would, before I could tell anyone that they had been here, if I was talking on Facebook or Twitter, I would have to say, oh, you know, Jennifer came over today and we sat outside on the catio 6 feet apart with our masks on, because otherwise someone would come in screaming. And I don't do well with that. Social media is an endless dance of being out of context. You can never assume that anyone knows anything about you other than the snippet that they have just received. That one tweet is all you are. And they're not necessarily going to do the research to find out who you are. You know, people don't verify pronouns, they don't verify the pronunciation of names, they don't verify book titles, and they certainly aren't going to verify that you're not a COVID denier. They're certainly not going to verify that you're not anti-science. They're just going to react in the moment to what they can see. And so sometimes we are all the rabbi with the turkey bacon. You know, a rabbi does not eat turkey bacon in public because someone who's just walking by doesn't know whether they're seeing a rabbi eating turkey bacon or a rabbi eating pork. And one of those is okay and one of them is not. So he might enjoy a nice turkey bacon sandwich at home, but that same rabbi is not going to go and order turkey bacon at the deli down the street.
Just things like that make me think, you know what? Let's just go get a cabin in the woods away from everybody, and that'll be just fine. We'll write our books. And
I think that all the time.
Rules.
James Tiptree Jr. was able to conceal the fact that she was a woman for more than a decade. She just didn't go to conventions. She corresponded with people purely over the mail, and no one had ever seen her picture, and so she was assumed to be a guy. Bob Silverberg wrote a whole essay introduction to one of her short story collections explaining why the people who were starting to think that maybe James Tiptree Jr. was a woman were wrong. Whole essay about the ineluctable masculinity of James Tiptree Jr. She was a woman named Alice Sheldon the whole time.
So, well, with us coming out of the pandemic, fingers crossed. I like the optimism that's in the air. It's such a refreshing change from where we were this time last year. I will take it. In fact, I just went to the movies for the first time in a year and a half. Mask on, fully vaccinated. Went to a 3:30 matinee. There was only three or four other people in the auditorium. Saw The Quiet Place too.
How was it?
Oh, it was wonderful. If you love The Quiet Place one, it's the same kind of tongue-in-cheek. We know we're having fun with the monsters, and they're going to chase people around, which, perfect. And I've got a 7-year-old here at home, and so everything I've watched for the last year and a half, when I've watched things, has been in, 5 to 10 minute snippets of, we need to do this, or we need to go do half hour of this, and now, okay, he's in bed, it's finally time for me to watch something, and I'm asleep. So to go and sit and watch something from beginning to end, just unbelievable bliss.
That's fair, yeah. I still haven't seen A Quiet Place 1.
Oh, and you have 2 wonderful experiences at that.
I do. I mean, unfortunately for me, I'm up in Seattle. I love horror movies. I don't like to watch them alone. And I have a horror movie buddy. Their name is Chris, and I adore them. And they moved from the Bay Area up to be here in Seattle with me just as everything was starting to go to heck. So there is so much stress and turmoil and fear for them in the real world that they don't want to watch horror movies right now. I've managed to get them to watch, I think, one movie I would really call a horror movie in the last year, and that was Army of the Dead. So it's sad, and I try not to yell at them too much about it, because it's not fair. You are where you are emotionally at any given time. It's not their fault that they are not really up for mutilations and all of that, but
different strokes for different folks. I find that the more stress I'm under, the more I love a horror movie, because my problem's comparative to trying to get through Las Vegas flooded with zombies.
Exactly. COVID started, I reread The Stand.
Me too, and I had 90% certain I had COVID. It was right at the start of quarantine in March, and I'm reading The Stand, and I'm sniffing, and I'm like, oh, my lungs are feeling a little tight. That book has never been more terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
How many? I know you've read it 50 times?
About that, yeah.
Is that your favorite Stephen King novel?
No.
What's the favorite?
It.
Me too.
And I have discovered a new circle of hell, which is having your favorite book since childhood become a massive media phenomenon. They have toys in Hot Topic. Everyone gets your It references. Suddenly, the book you've loved your whole life is topical, and you hate the movies. Like, that is a level of suffering I never anticipated. But unfortunately, I really love it, and I don't understand how you misunderstand members of the core cast that dramatically. Beverly is a gunslinger. She is not a damsel. She does not shoot with her eye. She shoots with her hand. She has not forgotten the face of her father, and she did not need to be actively sexually assaulted to be under threat. Nor did they need to turn her into a damsel to make the ending of movie number 1 fall together. It just made no sense.
I agree. I thought the first movie wasn't but that's okay. There was enough modernization that it was still fun. It reminded me of the book that I loved and reread every 3 years or so. And then the second movie was just, aside from Richie being gay, which I thought was a pretty ingenious change. Like, oh yeah, if King wrote that today, that's obviously what you would do with that character. That was glaringly missing from the 80s version. But other than that, it's like, did you read the book first?
Yeah. Did they have to take Ben's personality away and give it to Mike in order to justify lessening the racism? You know, how does that work? If Bev's still going to be your only girl, do you really have to reduce her to the Princess Peach who needs to be saved from the castle? They just made so many choices that, to me, showed a fundamental lack of understanding of who the characters were. But also, the turtle could not help that movie.
Yeah, honestly, I thought it was the Transformers of horror movies, because you could see the budget had increased exponentially over the first one. And like, oh, we have the money to do everything, so let's just do everything. And then nothing really has purpose or meaning. You didn't pick something essential to focus on.
Yep.
Oh, well. They'll remake it again, hopefully, eventually. And if they don't, the book's still there. It's great.
It's still there. It is great. It is... I have a relationship with it that I don't think I can ever have with another book.
Why is that, you think?
Because the first time I read it, I was younger than the members of the Losers Club. And now I am older than the members of the Losers Club. So I have been rereading it at least once a year, every year since I was 8 years old. I have grown up with this book. I have found something new in this book every time through. The last time the circle came around, the last time it should have woken up, my friend Kat Valenti and I actually took a pilgrimage to Bangor, and we wandered around and we saw all of the locations from the book. Went and did our little main thing. And that was amazing.
Were you especially creeped out by any particular site, or was it just fan?
The standpipe was so much bigger than I thought it would be. We don't have those on the West Coast. The standpipe was just horrifying in its size. And that really was it for me.
And aside from Stephen King, who I talk about entirely too much on this show because, I grew up, we're about a year difference between us, so a lot of, my sister had the My Little Ponies. I'm sure you knew plenty of people that had that.
I would like you to go and see if your sister still has them and get them for me.
Maybe.
Hunt and kill those ponies. They need to come home.
You know what? Honestly, she's got a daughter now, and I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of those ponies are floating around in her toy box at this point.
That's fair. I mean, ponies, we forget sometimes with the collectibles that were our childhood, that they are still toys. And the question of whether something is a toy or a collectible really is answered by context. Ponies come to me for a soft retirement. And they get their nice room and their hermetically sealed shelves, and they're never touching untreated wood ever again. And they get to rest. They get to be forgiven for the crimes of their youth. And some ponies are still in toy boxes and still being slammed around by the tail, and just like I used to play with my ponies, and that's great.
Yeah, I've got a couple of Batman action figures that are still in the package, but the only reason is because it was a duplicate somebody bought me, and I've already got one opened and on a shelf or that has been well
Mhm.
played with and loved. So I had heard you talk elsewhere about keeping a pony and a dice on your desk when you're writing,
Yep.
um, and I would love to hear what the reasoning is behind both of those.
I mean, ponies are because they bring me comfort. They make me feel better. I always have at least one die with me, and I use dice as a writing tool. You know, this is a D20, so it is sub-ideal. But if you've got a word count goal for today of 2,000 words, you just set it to the 20 when you sit down. And every time you finish 100 words, you rotate it to the next face down. So it gives you a physical manifestation of how much work you've done and how much work you have left to do, which is not normally something that you have as a writer. I am, like many of us, someone who likes to fidget, and I like having something to kind of roll in my hands and play with, and I should not do that with this die. Ow, ow, ow. This is a sharp-edged die. You could use this to kill a man. But, you know, dice and ponies are very important. I can't show you a pony right now because I'm actually downstairs in my office rather than upstairs at the desk where I do most of my working. So I have some velociraptors in reach. I have Raven from the Teen Titans in reach. I have my piggy bank, and I have a xenomorph, and that's it.
Do you actually play with the pony to kind of reimagine some of your childhood, or is it just looking at it enough?
Looking at it's usually enough, but I'll also fidget with it, and I put my ponies through little scenes and dioramas. There is no reason to get rid of your toys if you don't want to. They can be your friends. I found the third Toy Story movie fundamentally offensive. Like the idea that Woody could not be happy without his friends, that was fine. That Woody wants to stay with the rest of the toy box, okay. But Woody can't be happy if he's not being played with. Woody was already an antique when he came to Andy. Woody does not want to go through another childhood. Woody wants to sit on a nice, safe shelf with someone who loves him. So just the idea that if you're an adult toy collector, your toys are somehow unhappy, I found very upsetting.
The thing I like about Toy Story 3, because I'm with you, and actually the fourth one really ticked me off, where like he gets Bo Peep back. Spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen the fourth Toy Story, but he gets Bo Peep back, and he's like, "Well, bye, friends." Like, oh, Woody was apparently just a crappy friend all those years. That's terrible. But the third one, there's that scene where the toys are in the garbage pit and they're circling that fire and they all kind of look at each other. I think a couple of them hold hands and there's just that really long, dark pause of this is it. We accept our fate. I guess it's over. And then, spoilers, eventually they get saved. There's kind of a happy, not so happy ending there. But that movie never again gets happy enough to counteract the absolute darkness of that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful moment. But the ending, so... Hey, kids, did you know that adults are messed up too? When we were kids, there was a huge push of television and media, including a special called The Christmas Toy, which was the precursor to Toy Story, Rose Petal Place over in the girl toy aisle, all of that. The Velveteen Rabbit was very big, that told us our toys were alive. That when we weren't in the room, our toys could get up and move around and do things, and they had a life, and they just stopped when we came in the room and they froze. And that seems like a really cute idea. That seems like one of those things that's fun to think, right? But, yeah, no, not so much. Because while none of the adult toy collectors I know actually believe that our toys get up and move around at night, we have all been, to a certain degree, infected with animism. We all seem to believe on some level that our toys have feelings, that they want things. That, you know, you've survived 3 generations of children, you deserve a soft retirement. No, Billy doesn't like to be played with by the head. Nope, Barbie would prefer not to have her shoes taken off. You know, you will hear a lot of that from people in our age range, of people just talking about toys like they have wants and feelings. And that's because even though we know that's not the case, we don't always know it. And that was given to us by our parents as a great package gift with some of those same toys. And then they couldn't figure out why we didn't get rid of them the second we turned 20. It's not you can't spend my entire childhood telling me this is what a friend is shaped like and then expect me to dump my friend. I was saying before we started recording that sometimes readers will send me their childhood herds of Generation 1 My Little Pony, and I appreciate every single one of them that comes to me. But the main reason that people send them to me, that they tell me, other than we would like you to have these, is these were my friends. They took care of me. They loved me when no one else would. And I cannot sell my friends. It doesn't matter that I might be able to make some money if I put them up on eBay, and I'm not going to get any money just mailing them to an author. I can't sell them. They took care of me once. And I think that's both a beautiful illustration of how humans are and proof that maybe telling kids their toys have feelings is bad for them in the long run.
I suppose that's probably a little bit true. Yeah, I'm gonna have to ponder that, because I know that as we're speaking, Michael Keaton is wearing a bat suit again from Andy, however you say his last name, the director of it. So there will be another line of Michael Keaton themed Batman toys, and that's at least $100, $200 out of my wallet. It's already spent. Warner Brothers, you know where I am. Here you go. And I don't know that I will love those toys as much as the original '89 toys, but they will, I think, have some shared grace because it's part of the set. And I don't know if that's a product of parents or just extremely good marketing. It's something I ponder about myself occasionally, is because I'm pretty good about it. If I go to, back when I was still going to restaurants pre-pandemic, instead of ordering out, if I went to a restaurant and I knew I liked something, I was 90% probably going to order that same thing because it's for sure it's a safe thing. I like it. I know it. So sometimes I wonder if it's just a product of the Adam West reruns were on show at the right time for the Keaton movie to hit, for the Batmans to keep me going. And, oh, are you feeling a little bit grumpy here at adolescence? Good news. Here's Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns to really sink you in. And I wonder if that had been another character that had gotten that treatment and been the focus of mainstream love for that long, if it's still Batman on my shelf or if it's whoever the other character is that's merchandised to me.
It could be, and it's also possible to lose that love. Jurassic Park was my first home franchise. Jurassic Park was the big media franchise that said, hey, little girl, come in. You're welcome here. Batman was not super welcoming during our childhood and teen years to female fans. It just wasn't. And neither were the majority of superhero movies. Neither was Star Wars at the time, honestly. These were not things that thought my money had any value. And then we get Jurassic Park, and it gives us an equal number of male and female protagonists. It gives us people of color. It gives us all sorts of options. And it says everyone's money is welcome at Jurassic Park. Please come in. I would have been buying tickets, even knowing people were getting eaten by dinosaurs. I hear the theme music to Jurassic Park, and I still get a dopamine hit. I just perk right up at that theme. The da-da-da-da-da. I am there. And then Jurassic World happened. And Jurassic World was so dismissive of its female characters and so hostile toward women in the park that for the first time, I felt like they didn't want to sell me a ticket. They didn't want me at Jurassic Park. And so I stopped. I have not seen any of the more recent films, and I'm not interested. That is a franchise that no longer wants my money, and so it can't have it.
Fair enough.
No, it's Jurassic Park. I have a complicated relationship with. I love the book, but I also really wish Harry Knight had lived long enough to finish out his plagiarism case. And then Jurassic World. The real ideology of the Jurassic Park movies is God creates dinosaurs, God destroys dinosaurs, God creates man, man creates dinosaurs, dinosaurs eat man, woman inherits the earth. There is never an on-screen female death in one of the 3 Jurassic Park movies, like ever at all.
Yes, that's true. That hadn't occurred to me.
And then like Jurassic World, we punish the babysitter for not doing a good enough job of taking care of other people's children by giving her a death so prolonged and brutal that it made me uncomfortable. And making me uncomfortable with a horror movie death is really difficult. And it's just like, that was, when you add that to the fact that it was the first movie with no female kids, they only have boys, and one of their personalities is baby sexist. And now, like, here's one woman, we hate her because she doesn't want kids. Here's another woman, she has been stuck with 2 kids she didn't expect because she's not a babysitter, she's an assistant, and we're going to punish her for not being motherly enough. It's just like, you really don't want me here, do you?
Does Colin Trevorrow have some, well, I don't know, it's a Hollywood person, they've all got slightly spotty records. I thought that he had some directed. I know that's not Spielberg. In fact, I liked, just in terms of representation, the second movie, because I thought Julianne Moore was, I can't remember her character's name right offhand, but was a much stronger character. She's the first one to the island. She's ahead of everybody else. They're there to save her, and then she's saving them. And then Goldblum's daughter, Sugar's wife, is African American, and that was one of the first instances of an interracial family in a mainstream story we can remember.
Yep. And then we switch to Jurassic World, where it's all pretty white people, and Claire is basically there to be a stereotypical Hollywood strong female character. And all of her strength is, look how well I perform femininity while in a jungle where it makes no sense.
Okay, you've convinced me. That movie's trash.
It is.
I'm with you.
Drove me away from my heart's true franchise.
My standard was just, were the dinosaurs pretty cool? Did I like the part where the T-Rex showed up? I did, but nope, I hadn't given it the full consideration. You're right.
I love Trexie. Trexie has been my girl since I was a kid, but just no can do.
Well, does that how does that shape your responsibility to your readers, your feelings of portrayals by a franchise like Jurassic Park? And I'm sure, because we're children of the 80s, that's far from the only one that did not have empowerment. In fact, there's a quote from you I wanted to make sure I ask you about. I'll find it in a moment. But basically, if you are aware of a character that feels like they're not being represented, you feel you have a personal responsibility to include that character in the story?
I have a rule that if you are someone I know well enough that I would give you my phone number, like you're a person that I am acquainted with, and you tell me you never get to see people who look like you in stories, I will put someone who looks like you in a story at my first opportunity to do so. And that is because we all know we exist. You know that you're there, whether or not I ever write a character that you can relate to. But part of how we as people learn what people look like, learn what the scope of humanity looks like, is by encountering them in story. That is a known facet of how human psychology works. We learn empathy by reading about people and by hearing about people. And we learn to see other people as people by reading about them and hearing about them. And that is why representation in media is so incredibly important. Yes, it's important for you to be able to read a book and see yourself in the main character, but it is even more important for me to be able to read a book and see you as a main character. Which is why, and this is honestly unfair to everyone, if you ask someone, picture a generic protagonist, 90% of people, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, anything, will respond with white man. That's the default. White man has become invisible. It's not distracting. No one asks, why is he white? Why is he a man? Well, he's a white man. He is the generic protagonist. But if we actually wanted a generic protagonist by just human statistics, it would be an Asian woman. That is the most common single phenotype of human. So your existence should not be any more default than my existence. Everyone should have an opportunity to be in that role of generic protagonist that we all have to learn to empathize with. Because the problem becomes that you get generations of authors where all of the women are writing men brilliantly and all of the non-binary people are writing men brilliantly because we have been taught to empathize with men since we were born. But the men can't write women or non-binary people, and the women can't write non-binary people because we have only been taught to empathize with who we are and with white men.
Shameless plug, since we happen to be recording this week, but check out episode 120, esteemed audience, with my interview with Payal Doshi, where she talks about her earliest fiction for years was writing about white men before she finally felt comfortable writing about an Indian family, an Indian character similar to her background.
Part of that is that we get told that white men will only empathize with white men. So if we want our books to sell and be successful, we have to write about those white men. And so we wind up putting our own identities on a back burner because we just don't trust that anyone else will come for the party. And that is not fair. It's not fair to kids who don't fit in that category. It's not fair to adults who don't fit in that category. I have had people older than me literally come to me crying because one of my books was the first time they saw someone that actually looked like them in a published piece of fiction. And that is profoundly unfair. I think that my greatest single weakness as a human is that I expect the universe to be fair. I know it's not, but I still expect it. And so when I can do something to rectify it, even a tiny bit, I will.
Just a curiosity, I ask these questions. I don't know the answer, which is why I'm asking. But if you're writing about a character, now you're 3 different people on paper already. That's the pen names we don't know about. But if you're writing about somebody sooner or later far outside of your personal experience, say if you're going to write about an Asian woman, well, you're a woman, you're not Asian. How do you temper that? Do you use cultural sensitivity readers that come in and kind of help you and make sure that you've done a great job of representation? Do you ever feel like, oh, that should be represented, but it's not my story to tell? What are your rules regarding things like that?
I mean, you say you don't know the answers. There really is no answer. There are best practices. There are things we can do to try and not be jerks. But there's no single, if you do it this way, it will work. I use cultural consultants and sensitivity readers, depending on what I'm doing. I do look at some stories and go, you know what? That story is not for me. My 2 sisters, my 2 younger sisters on my mother's side, are both Latina because they have a different father than I do. And we grew up in the barrio, not just in the ghetto, in the barrio of our part of California. So they were 2 Latina girls surrounded by Latino men who spoke a language they didn't speak, but who recognized certain physical features that they have. And so they were harassed by both the white kids for not being white enough and by the Latina kids because they were not Mexican enough, because they were not brown enough. And the story of their childhood, even though I shared it, is not my story to tell. It would be a white author capitalizing on brown pain. And that's not appropriate. There are enough stories that are mine to tell that there is absolutely no reason I would need to be telling that story. It is impossible to get a perfect answer, and sometimes the answer is wait. You know, one of my series under my own name, probably the series with the most penetration in a teen audience, is the Wayward Children books. And those start with Every Heart a Doorway and proceed onward from there. In Every Heart a Doorway, we meet a character named Cade. And Cade is a boy who went through a mirror into what they call a fairyland called Prism, where they wanted him to fight the Goblin King and be their next queen. And he finally one day stood up and said, well, I'm not a girl. I'm never going to be your queen. And they responded by kicking him out of fairyland. And that's how he wound up a part of our cast. So Cade is a trans boy. He would be a trans man if he were a little bit older, but he's a trans boy right now. And he is a trans boy who is explicitly written not to have always known. Because he is one of those characters that someone I know and love came to me and said, I never get to see myself in fiction. When I see a trans narrative in fiction, it's always a case of, oh, I always knew. I always knew from the time I was born that I was a girl or I was a boy. And this friend of mine, he didn't always know. He is a man, absolutely a man, who will tell you that when he was a little girl, he did things this way. And so that's Cade's story. Cade is a man who was a little girl at one time. That is a genuine trans experience. It is not unique to my friend. It is not unique to Cade. It is rare in fiction. I am a cis author telling a complicated trans story with him. And so right now, Cade has to wait. And Cade has to wait until I have built enough trust with my readers that when they pick up a book and the first sentence refers to Cade as a girl, they don't get mad at me. So sometimes building enough trust that people will forgive you long enough to see that what looks like a betrayal is not, is the most important step.
One more question in this vein, and then I've got lots of questions for you about your writing habits and how you have built an empire. But you have built an empire. You've been nominated for several Hugos. You've written, how many books have you written now?
I don't know.
It's a lot, right? It's got to be like close to 40, 50?
More than 40. It's a lot.
So if somebody comes along and they have the authentic experience of whatever character we want to pick, but they do not have your background, they have not built your empire, they do not have your reach and your readership, does that tilt the scales at all if maybe they would be better working with you to get a better constructed story? Again, don't have an answer, just want to hear your thoughts.
I mean, you keep saying empire, but that really implies more of a Rick Riordan level. I am not at Rick Riordan's level. I would love to be at Rick Riordan's level. Rick Riordan could buy and sell me 90 times over. I like to eat, so I would love that. This is less of an empire and more of a struggling island nation. You know, we are very small. We don't have a lot of room for expansion. Sometimes we have tsunamis. People keep trying to take us over. We don't really know what's going on half the time. And I'm sure I just said something accidentally insulting, and I am sorry. That was just kind of fumbling for a metaphor. I am not yet at a prominence level where it would really be an advantage for a marginalized writer to team up with me, nor, honestly, am I available at all times. You know, I am booked out through 2024 right now. It's a fun, fun day. There are times when collaborating with a more established author is the way to go. But not always.
So you're booked out to 2024, and I know you write, what, about 6-7 books a year on average?
About that, yeah.
So is there time for you to chase a whim of fancy where you've just got an idea that's not under contract just for a little bit?
I do that just for fun. Like, I write about an average of 2 books a year that we don't publish. And it's not because they're bad books. It's because there's not room for them in the schedule. And so we put them in the trunk. When I get hit by a bus, they'll keep putting out years for 10 years. They'll keep putting out books for 10 years. I'll be V.C. Andrews. You know, found another lost Seanan McGuire manuscript. We thought she was dead. She is so dead. She has been dead for years. She really had no chill, did she? No. None at all.
Well, you've got the dice. 1,000 words is a good start. What's a good day look like? How many times are you turning that dice over?
I use multiple dice on most days rather than resetting the same die for multiple word counts. And I actively do not give my daily word count. We all live on social media, which we talked about a bit at the beginning of this. And we forget that social media is the highlight reels of one another's lives. I commented on Twitter one day that if I did something, I could have a cookie. And Laurel Hamilton promptly yelled at me for assuming that I had to earn food. And I'm like, I don't talk about everything I eat. You know, I have eaten today. I have had an omelet. I have had some cauliflower. I had a small salad. I am getting calories. I'm okay. But like many of us, I can use food as a reward. So if I finish doing this somewhat unpleasant task that I don't want to do, I can have a cookie, and I'm allowed to set my reward systems. But I'm never going to tell you about everything that sucks. So what we wind up with is that younger writers, and that doesn't even necessarily mean chronological age, that means young in their writing journey. So you could be 19 and be an older writer because you started getting really serious when you were 11. You could be 30 and be a younger writer by this definition. But younger writers hop on social media and they find the writers that they know and look up to, and they see, oh my gosh, Robert did 3,000 words yesterday. I can't even manage 800. I'm never going to be successful. And then they beat themselves up based on an arbitrary number that fits your life, but doesn't necessarily fit their life. You know, I have made choices with my life. I have no children. I don't want any. I have toys, cats, and dice. I have cats.
A huge difference maker.
Huh?
Just in terms of freeing up time, that has to be a huge difference maker.
Oh, it's a huge difference maker. You know, I have no children. I actually bought a house big enough that my mother could live here. My mother lives here, and the way she pays her rent is by cleaning my house. I am the modern Thoreau. I don't do my own housework, and I'm paying for it. This is not I'm exploiting my mother. She gets free rent in the Seattle area. That's a big frickin' deal, but the compensation is worth it for the time it gives me. So I've got all of these factors giving me extra time that you don't necessarily have. And then on top of it, I am a full-time author. This is my job. It is 100% of what I do. And that is the authorial equivalent of being an Olympic athlete. I'm in full-time training. I get up in the morning, I start writing. I write until I hit whatever number I have declared for that day. I stop writing, I go to bed. So saying if you can't hit this number that I hit, you are doing something wrong is abusive. It's cruel. And so I don't give out hard numbers because it's not fair.
Fair enough. Well, let's not talk hard numbers because you are the Olympic athlete. We admire what you're doing. It's not going to be possible for all of us. But let us fantasize for a moment if we had that life of an Olympic athlete. Is it writing all day? I know you play Overwatch for at least part of that day, right?
I generally get up, start writing, write until my brain kind of fuzzes out, eat lunch, do something else for 30 to 45 minutes, and then go back to writing. 30 to 45 minutes can be playing Overwatch. It hasn't been much recently. I don't like the way that they've rebalanced heroes. I am not the world's most amazing Overwatch player. I never have been. And so the fact that they keep restructuring the game to benefit the top 2% of players just means that every time I get decent, I get hammered. I was a Mercy main. They nerfed Mercy for the sake of the competitive players. I'm still not okay with losing my big res. You know, that sort of thing. So I've been sorting my dice a lot recently. I have a big dice collection. It is in my Little Pony room. I would like it to be entirely put away so that I can start better sorting and organizing my Little Ponies.
So, are we talking like it's, 8 hours of writing and 4 hours of whatever you choose to do? I assume you've got to read somewhere in there, and then, of course, you've got social events like this one and all the other things you have to do. So what's an average work day or average work week look like for you?
An average work day looks like I work from roughly 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., about there. And then I do whatever until I go to bed. I get up at 6 or 7 no matter what. I can't help it. It sucks. I hate it. I wish I could sleep until 9 or 10 like a normal human. I can't. But so, get up at 7, pretty much start working. It takes me about 30 minutes before my hands come fully online and I can really type. And I'll use that time to check social media, feed my dragons over on Flight Rising, which is a clicky dragons game, whatever. And by the time that my hands have warmed up and I can actually start typing, it's been about 30 minutes. I'll usually eat breakfast somewhere in that range. I'm good at forgetting to eat, but I do need to do it. So.
And what is your social media balance? Because I saw that you're fairly active on Twitter, and you've got a pretty sizable following.
I bop into Twitter periodically. The best thing I ever did with Twitter was basically restrict myself to my mentions. I spend 90% of my Twitter time entirely in my notifications tab, and will only pop out for a few minutes if something actually needs my attention. And that's because there is no reason to go around picking fights with people. There is legitimately no reason that I need to be using my time on Twitter to wander over to your profile and tell you that your beard looks stupid in that shirt. I don't know. As long as I stay in my mentions, I am mostly interacting with people who want to be interacting with me. And that makes for a much more pleasant experience, and it keeps my blood pressure lower.
Fair enough. And so at this point, being on contract after you said 2024, you do have the awards, you've got the street cred. We haven't built an empire, but do you feel the confidence that you've made it and you're going to be able to continue to write indefinitely? Or is there still a bit of panic that if I don't do what I need to do, this is all over and I got to go be I don't know, get a job at a restaurant or whatever is going to be available post-pandemic?
I don't think the panic ever fully goes away. You know, I grew up very, very poor. I grew up in the state of California in the welfare system. I ate the moldy bread and the government cheese. And that was my entire life. That was my childhood. So I have a grinding fear of poverty. I just have an appallingly large fear of poverty. Every time something doesn't go exactly the way it's supposed to go, every time it doesn't go according to plan, part of me is convinced that I'm going to be living under a bridge by this time next year. And you know, I live in America. We have to pay for our own health insurance. We have to pay for our own health care. I am not as young as I used to be, and I am over 40. I am 42 years old, and I have hit the point where delightfully my body starts breaking down. It's the best thing. So I can't stop working. And the one real downside of choosing a creative lifestyle is that you don't have any, you're paying your own into Social Security. You don't get to retire. You write until you break.
Well, that brings up the question I've been pondering for a while: is do writers retire? I know some stop, or at least they don't publish anymore. But can you foresee yourself, even if everyone said no more contracts, we're never going to pay you for another dime, could you stop writing?
I wouldn't stop writing. You know, there's a difference between retirement and just not writing anymore. And I don't think I am capable of stopping writing. I started writing because I couldn't not write. I want everyone to meet my imaginary friends, and I want you to like them as much as I do.
So with three different author names, Mira writes Feed, writes the horror, the darker stuff. She's Who's Coming to StokerCon, and then you're writing the middle grade as well. Do you put on? I'm sure you don't put on actual physical costumes to embody these different writers. But what changes within you, or is it all in you and they just put whoever's name on there is right for the market?
I mean, it's all in me. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons since I was 12. You learn how to be different characters. I do find that I pick different words for different people to a degree that I would not have thought was maintainable when I first started doing this. I would have thought that was just not going to work. And it turns out to work pretty darn well, you know, and part of it is knowing who's writing what. Deborah writes for a middle grade audience, and that means that she does not swear very much. She does not write sexy stuff. There's a lot of stuff that Deborah doesn't do, and that's okay. And it helps that Seanan is not super into writing sexy stuff either. Mira writes no sexy stuff at all. All of the people in Mira's books, if they're naked, they're dead. The most fun part about having 3 pseudonyms is that if you want to discuss certain things, you do actually have to start talking about yourself in the third person. And then people are like, Seanan, do you think that you're multiple people? No. Are you sure? Yeah. Because it sounds like you think that you're multiple. No.
Fair enough. Just out of curiosity, I know you wrote the Harlequin romances to pay through undergrad. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you have kind of in your back pocket? Hey, if for some reason, because you do have this fear of poverty, and you have this skill and this talent, is there a possibility that, here's another pen name, we're going with straight romance, whatever the most popular romance category is at the time, and we're paying bills that way? Or is that something you have no interest in whatsoever?
I have no interest in it. And also, I think more importantly, readers are cannier today than they used to be. You know, we have the internet. We have the ability to go comparison shopping. We can find things, and people can tell when you're insincere. I am not very good at, I mentioned, that I don't write the sexy stuff. I don't care. I think it's boring. I don't want to write the sexy stuff. And that's why I don't write the sexy stuff. And that means that if I'm trying to sell to an actual romance audience of actual romance readers, they can tell very quickly that I'm kind of disingenuous. They can tell without putting a lot of effort in that I'm making fun of them, for lack of a better way of putting it, that I'm not writing them a sincere story that actually plays into the kind of things that they enjoy and want to read about. And as a consequence, I don't think I would be able to publish romance unless I were trying to do it now and under my own name. I would have to be like, no. I'm a New York Times bestseller. Let me write you a romance. And that would damage my sales very badly. That said, I love chicklit romance. The Meg Cabot space, the Princess Diaries space, I would love to write those. And I have written a couple of them. I just haven't been able to get them published because we're not in a space right now where that is a very popular subgenre. But I live in eternal hope that the fun, frothy, not as much about the sexy as they are about the romancy romances will make a comeback.
Well, you're writing 2 extra books every year. I assume you've got a nice collection that as soon as a market opens up, let me get this over.
No, market opens up, I'm ready to move in.
And so, okay, you sit down and you're going to start a new book. What happens first? Is it a conversation with the agent about what's expected, what kind of book it is, or have you already sat down and written an outline? What's your first step?
I mean, honestly, my first step these days is get a contract, which sounds super privileged, but is kind of where I am currently because I am primarily a series writer. I write books and then I write their sequels. And that is a nice position to be in. I like it here. It can also be occasionally a little bit stifling because I don't actually get to make a decision about my next 4 books. There are no decisions to be made. They've already been made. Those books are sold. I am going to be writing the book that I have promised to my editors. Period. There is no negotiation. There is no room for a conversation. And that's okay. Again, I knew what I was signing up for when I did it. This is not a deal with the devil. This is straight up, you wanted a job, you got a job. But the other downside, not downside even, but the other thing about working in long series is that I've got outlines already. I'm always a little bit lost these days when I start something new because I'm like, wait, I have to think? But thinking isn't part of writing. I just sit down and I write. I would like to speak to the manager of reality. The manager of reality is not taking my calls. But, so it's a little bit jarring. honestly, when I hit something that's not part of one of the ongoing series.
So with multiple series going and multiple books in, how are you keeping track, and how far in advance do you plan out your story?
So Batman, he's got a weakness to kryptonite, right?
I'm sorry?
Batman, he's got a weakness to kryptonite, right?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And he likes to
if you can't
fight
get
Lex
his hands
Luthor?
on it, fight Superman.
You had no trouble keeping that straight.
I did not know.
That is how. I love the stories that live in my head as much as you love Batman.
And they're all just, you don't have like files upon files of here's all the obscure things I need to know about this character that was mentioned once 2 books ago that was a small part, or?
I have some character wikis that I maintain, and, I try to make sure that I don't contradict myself, but I also have access to the fan-made wikis, and I have access to all of my files, and I can data search just my own earlier books if I need to. But usually the comparison I'll give people is it's like watching television. I've got shows that are inside my head and I don't have to pay cable, and it's great. And I like to watch them. It makes me happy. Why would I have trouble keeping that straight? Do you have trouble with the things that make you happy?
Oh, no, not that make me happy, but keeping things straight, sure. Yeah, I had to keep pretty detailed notes over a trilogy, and that's nothing compared to some of your series.
And, some of those, the October Day books are, I love them desperately, and they are really a self-indulgent attempt to justify my time in college. Like, big chunks of the Toby books are cribbed from my undergrad thesis. So I kind of did that research very expensively quite a few years ago.
Do you ever reach out to fans and say, hey, would you like to be my beta reader ahead of time? You know this series very well. Let me know if there's something that is missing.
That way lies some big dangers for an author. For one thing, you don't know who you can actually trust, which is a terrible statement, but we had that big brouhaha more years ago than I think it was, I'm pretty sure, but not that long ago, where a reader leaked Stephenie Meyer's entire upcoming book to the internet. And so she wound up having to pull a Twilight book, not necessarily high literature, but it was still wrong. She wound up having to pull a Twilight book because the whole thing had been posted online by someone who wanted to show, they said, how clean her first drafts were. I would literally die. You don't know if it's a reader and someone that you don't know, whether you are sending your book to somebody that will actually respect your privacy, that will actually not talk about things that you have asked them not to talk about, or whether you are putting yourself into this situation where suddenly your entire new book is online and you're going to have to deal with that. You also potentially run into the issue where legally you own your characters. That is how this works. That is why fanfic is okay, and I am a huge advocate for fanfic. Fan fiction is A-okay. I cannot get sued for writing an October Day book that uses a concept that you've also used in one of your fanfics. That's not how it works. But you could potentially decide that I had stolen something from one of your fanfics and take me to court. I would win. We're 90% sure that I would win if you tried to sue me for stealing your idea when it had been published in a fanfic based on my work. But back again to reputation. We live in a reputation economy. We live in the social media age. It is not being a good neighbor to steal things from your fans. It's not. It's not being a good member of a community. So if you can legitimately go onto Reddit and say, Seanan McGuire read my fanfic, Seanan McGuire stole this idea from me, I have proof, and what you have is an email from me thanking you for your help, I now look like a real jerk. You have just damaged my reputation in a way that is probably more harmful than actually managing to sue me. So unfortunately, the fear of litigation does mean that there has to be a little boundary drawing.
So how do you interact with your fans at virtual events for now until we're back in person everywhere, or rereading their reviews after the fact, reading their fan mail after the fact?
I have a PA who receives all of my email before I get to see it, and she goes over it to make sure that there's nothing in there that I'm not allowed to see. She does actually filter out people sending me email about their fanfics or telling me their ideas. I never see those. And she also filters out people calling me nasty names because I did something they didn't like. But I get the rest of it. And in person, people are usually pretty good about not just walking up and starting to tell you about their fanfic. You know, so in person, it's great. I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm a giant nerd. Like, I have no chill at all. Never have. It's not one of my great gifts. No chill. I am enthusiastic about everything. I'm happy to see everything. I'm like a golden retriever that somebody went and gave blue jeans to. And as a consequence, it is not hard to interact with readers because I am one of you. You know, I am the first fan of all my own stuff. That's why I take the time to read it. You know, I wouldn't tell you stories about these people if I didn't love them. As Mira Grant, I wrote the first ever YA alien book. It's called Alien Echo, and it is aimed at teen audiences. And when they asked if I would do that, I did a dance all around my house, not because they were paying me. They did pay me, but they didn't pay me that well. But because Alien is literally the first movie I can remember seeing. I was 3 years old the first time I saw Alien, which is way too young to be watching Alien, and there was something wrong with the adult male who let me watch it. But, you know, it is the first movie. It is foundational to me. I am who I am in part because of Alien. And so being able to be a part of that franchise was just such a huge deal for me. It was enormous. And, you know, again, they did pay me, but also, again, that is not why I took the job. I took the job because I was getting to make Alien canon. I was getting to do something in this world that meant so much to me. And I bring this up because when they announced that I was writing this Alien YA novel, quite a few people wanted to announce that the franchise was dead because I was going to get cooties all over the xenomorphs somehow. And one dude decided that the best use of his time was harassing me on Twitter, like seriously going at me on Twitter, about the fact that I was only doing this for the money. There was no possible motivation for writing a YA alien book that was not, they are paying you $1 million. They did not pay me $1 million. Kind of wish they had, though. That would have been nice. They did not pay me $1 million. I would have done it for less than they actually did pay me because it was being a part of something I loved, and I'm a giant nerd with no chill. So, you know, that helps a lot at dealing with readers. Just, you cannot spend 5 minutes in an actual physical room with me and not pick up on the fact that giant nerd, no chill.
Well, I've heard you talk elsewhere back when in-person events were still a thing, that people, if you were a guest of honor, people were way too handsy, coming up and touching you uninvited as a total stranger. Between that and between these toxic fandoms, that I'm sure you have to have been approached by somebody shouting at you about Alien or something else. How do you separate from yourself, and are you able to keep that from dampening your joy, your pure joy at doing the thing you love?
It does sometimes dampen the joy. You know, my last physical convention of 2020 before the world shut down was a comics and anime convention in Biloxi, Mississippi. And there was a dude there who was selling individually the D&D pre-painted minis that you can buy from WizKids. And I love these things. God, I love them so much. It is unreasonable how much I love them. And so I'm standing at his table trying to go through the piles and piles of minis, and there are so many, and I have some money, and I really want to exchange the money that I have for the minis that he doesn't want anymore. Like, this is a match made in heaven. I'm going to get minis. And some people come up that had come to the convention that were readers of mine that had not been able to bring themselves to approach me at a signing, but because I was at this minis table, they saw me as approachable. And they wanted to get stuff signed. And I'm like, that is great, but could you go away? I am not being professional mode Seanan right now. I am buying minis. I really just want to be left alone to buy minis. Please? And you can't say that. You can't do that. It doesn't work. You know, especially when you're writing for a younger audience, which I frequently am. You can't really say to an 11-year-old who is excited about your book, I'm sorry, I don't have time for you. It doesn't work. So part of it is remembering when I'm in these spaces that I am there to work. I am at my job. And what will make me happy is less important than what will make a single reader happy. And if I just approach it with that attitude, I don't get as grumpy about it. And it is sad. It makes me very sad when I have to take that step back and make that adjustment, but it's also worth it. And it's what I signed up for.
When you're writing about Aliens or X-Men or Ghost Spider, any of these established IPs versus another book in any of your series, obviously you don't want to let your fans down. Is there a difference in worrying about not letting your fans down and not letting not only your fans, but all of the fans of the IP down? Does that create extra pressure, or is it a little bit less pressure?
It both creates extra pressure and a little bit less pressure, because when you are writing in your own IP, you are the arbiter of whether something is so. And you can get used to that. You can kind of get drunk on playing God, you know, and this idea that you know everything. And that is obviously not the case about someone else's IP. And I have had IP holders. I actually, just before we got on this call today, received a note from an IP holder that I'm working with telling me that I had part of my interpretation of a character wrong, and they needed me to adjust it. And that's fine. I don't mind adjusting. I don't mind rejiggering how I'm doing things to fit the IP holder's vision. Now, occasionally we have run into things where it's like, I have been a fan of this character forever. I know them. We are friends. We have had late night conversations in my head when I was trying to go to sleep. Like, what the heck do you mean I don't have this character beat correct? Clearly it is you, the IP holder, who is wrong. And that is sadly not a position that they take very seriously. As it turns out, you can't do that. And that is occasionally tedious. But for the most part, it's just a different kind of pressure. And it's almost a relief sometimes, because you will get it wrong. There is honestly no way to approach a pre-established IP with passionate fans and not get it wrong for someone. There is always going to be somebody who looks at what you've done and says, that's not my Emma Frost. And you just want to make sure that it's neither you, who is going to have to live by those words, nor the IP holder, who is also going to have to live by those words, just in a different way. Because you are expendable, they can get a new you tomorrow. You just bring in a new you. You're out. Bye-bye.
Well, I mean, we know that IP holders can get it wrong. I mean, we were talking about Jurassic World versus Jurassic Park. A lot of the same names on the, obviously not Michael Crichton, but Spielberg's there. Frank Marshall's there. Lots of people behind the original Ellie Sattler are signing off on what's happening in the future. So that obviously it can happen.
Oh, yeah, no.
That's going to be frustrating as hell.
The IP holders can straight up get it wrong. And part of that is that who's involved does change. You know, you mentioned that Crichton was gone. Well, Michael Crichton passed away. And we don't know how much of that original sensibility that everyone is welcome at Jurassic Park came from him. And you also have to factor in the fact that times change, character interpretations change, what people want from things change. We don't know how much of what I object to in Jurassic World actually came from the creative team versus coming from the movie studios, because the idea of what will make a successful movie has changed. The first Jurassic Park was made in a time of practical effects and with an expectation of a much lower box office take being a success. We go back to Jurassic Park after 20 years away. They are literally standing there going, if you don't make us $1 billion, if you're not the new Avengers, we don't love you anymore.
And we're looking to launch a shared universe because everything is a shared. What is a filker?
Okay, so filk is the folk music of science fiction and fantasy. A filker is someone who filks. It is someone who commits filk music. Filk is one of the primary self-identificational clades of fandom, meaning you are a filker if you say you are a filker. If you say you are not a filker, you are not a filker, even if you are doing something that every filker alive would identify as filk music. It's kind of like roller derby, where you can use the word jam for every other word in a sentence. You can talk about filking for an hour and only say the word filk.
So when you're, I was listening to your album earlier. When you're singing, you sing, you don't do comedy directly anymore, but you're still doing a lot of presenting. Do you have other artistic pursuits, and does that boost your artistic pursuit of writing?
I mean, I draw, but not as much as I used to, mostly because there's just a lack of time. I think everything feeds into everything else. I do a lot of structured poetry. I really, really enjoy writing structured poetry. It's always been something I loved. And I feel that writing comic scripts is easier if you have a background in structured poetry, if it's something that you understand how to do. And that is primarily because a comic script at its heart is a form of structured poetry. It is a limited number of words in a limited amount of space. You have a very tight form. You absolutely have to fit within it. With a novel, if you come in between 80,000 and 90,000 words, you're a short novel. If you come in between 90,000 and 110,000, you're an average length novel. You've got all of this big wiggle room. With a comic, you've got 20 pages, fixed number of panels per page. That's all you get. So it's really a form of structured poem. And that is probably my primary non-fiction-based artistic exploit right now. And
does that give you a nice reprieve? Or are you eager to get back to your characters, your stories, the fiction that you know after you've done that?
I mean, it doesn't matter how much you like something. After you've been doing it for a while, you kind of want to do something else for 5 minutes. So I think everything is a nice reprieve from everything else. You know, after you've been sleeping all night, it doesn't matter how nice the sleep was, you're going to wake up.
You say that. I had some roommates in college that would disagree.
College is a different time, man.
That's true. Well, speaking of reprieve, I saw a quote from you that I had to follow up on. You said that if it's just you on a vacation, if you've got a stick and some good boots, just about any swamp will serve nicely. What are you going to do in that swamp with the stick and the good boots? Are you going gator hunting? What's going to happen?
I'm going to go looking for whatever lives in that swamp, and then I'm going to play with it. I have a great gator hunting story that I cannot tell you because we are an all ages podcast, but you should ask me at some point, probably after drinking. I was a herpetology major. I love reptiles. I love finding reptiles. I love leeches. I think that they are super cool and super fun. Although it's better to hunt leeches with cling film and a swimsuit than it is with good boots.
Well, we get the conferences open back up. Hopefully next year in Colorado, we'll be at StokerCon. I'll buy the drinks. I'll wait until you've had a couple, and then it's gator time. It's
gator time! Try to do it when Joe Lansdale is there. I think it'll make him really uncomfortable.
Oh, really good tip. He was an absolute highlight of the con this year. Everybody was, but he was just, well, I don't know how I want to compliment him exactly, except that he said lots of things I wish I had been smart enough to say.
That is fair.
So, the esteemed audience knows I have to ask this, and I'm watching our time, and I know we're coming to the end, but I ask everybody, and I wouldn't let them down. No drinks this time. This one I'm going to ask straight. Have you ever seen a flying saucer and or a ghost?
I have definitely seen a ghost. I have not seen a flying saucer. So the house in which I live is somewhat creepy. I live in the Seattle area. We are the serial killer capital of the world. We've literally had more serial killers up here in the Pacific Northwest than anywhere else in the world. I'm in my office right now, but if I open this door, which is not a closet, we go into the library. And there is a ghost in the library. You can't see him right now because the lights are up and it's daylight. But he usually appears as a black hovering orb right about where I'm standing. I am not the only person that has seen him. Multiple other people who have been staying in my house, because I have an air mattress here in the library, you can see it behind me, that people will sleep on because this serves as a guest room. Multiple other people who have stayed here have asked me the next day about the black hovering orb. So we do have a ghost here in this room. And sometimes, if you've been staying down here for too long and he is tired of you, he will go from being an orb to a humanoid figure that appears in the shadows in the middle of the night. And that's really unsettling. So we're pretty sure if they took ground penetrating radar to the property, they would find his body. We don't know. I have considered having an exorcist in. I have not done that because while he is unsettling, he also lives here. You know, he was here when we moved in, and if he is buried somewhere on the property, it's rude to expel him. It's rude to evict him just because he hovered at me. Like, sorry, dude. I didn't know that you were hovering here. But yeah, no, there's definitely a ghost. Kind of wish there weren't. Find him a little bit unsettling. Not his fault, though.
So it's unsettling. Does that give you any kind of comfort that, hey, there's some version of the afterlife? Hopefully you do not the opposite of whatever he did and you don't end up in a house hovering, but you can go on to wherever there is.
I mean, I already believed in ghosts even before the dude in the house, but I don't find a lot of comfort in Captain Hovers a lot. Like, he is unsettling, and I do not actually enjoy his... I'm sorry. I know you can probably hear me. Note that I said I wasn't getting an exorcist in. I just find you unnerving. Leave me alone. You know, so I don't find him super comforting. I'm sorry.
Fair enough. Well, at least it sounds like he doesn't come in and bother you while you're writing or try to attempt to be a muse.
He has thus far at least stayed in the library. Like, my office is connected to the library.
If you're cool, right?
Huh?
You go in there and you get whatever book you need, and then you leave the library. You're mostly cool, right?
Yep, he doesn't come out of the library. He has not appeared to anyone in full daylight. We have had our carbon monoxide levels checked. We know that he's not carbon monoxide. He's just the unsettling floating guy in the library, and it's so fun. It's super fun. We really love it.
Seanan McGuire, this has been an absolute pleasure and a treat. What better way is there to spend a Friday night? This has been just tremendous. My last question is always some variation. If you could go back to the start of your writing career, middle, wherever in your writing career it would have been helpful to you, and give yourself some advice that might be helpful to all of the writers listening or watching us now, what would you go back and say to yourself?
I mean, what I would go back and say to myself is social media trends will always change. You're never going to make everyone happy. Self-promote more. But I don't think that's super helpful, really. Probably what I would say is it's going to be okay. You can take a frickin' nap.
Where can esteemed audience find you online, following you on social media, all that good stuff?
I am on Twitter as @Seanan McGuire. I'm on Tumblr as Seanan McGuire. I'm on TikTok as Seanan McGuire. I'm everywhere as Seanan McGuire. If you can spell my name, you can find me. If you can't spell my name, you're probably under the age of 7 and shouldn't be looking for me yet.
Fair enough and well said. Esteemed audience, as always, you know who I am. Go to middlegreatninja.com. There's thousands of interviews with editors, literary agents, all the best authors, all the best people. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. And God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.